Hey folks, welcome back to the podcast. Today's topic is going to hit a nerve for a lot of us. It's about, is there actually a compound or a medication out there right now that can not only help us to lose fat, but it can also help us to become healthier, to change those underlying metabolic markers like blood sugar, cholesterol, and may even help our brains? Is there something out there right now that can do that? And the answer is yes. Yes, there is. There seems to be. So it's called Ozempic. That's the brand name. Semaglutide is the name of the compound. What is the compound? It is a peptide, and it is classified as a GLP-1 agonist. My guest today is Caleb Greer. Caleb is a family nurse practitioner who operates in Austin, Texas. And he is a whiz at this stuff. Caleb and I often will collaborate on my clients together. He's amazing at all these things. And one of these things that one of the topics that we've talked about in the past has been hormones. And as a matter of fact, if you want to know more about Caleb, you will want to check out episode 10 of this podcast from last fall when we talk about hormones and hormone balancing. He's a wealth of information. He's my own personal Google scholar. Whenever I get stuck on something, I pick up the phone and I call Caleb. Anyway, if you want to get in touch with Caleb from this episode, you can reach him through his clinic in Austin, Texas, and you would email his assistant, whose name is Nate, and Nate at austinppc.com. Sorry, didn't want to give you the wrong email there. And that would be how you'd get in touch with Caleb. Now, guys, before you run off and do anything crazy, just remember that none of the information in this episode or any other episode is intended to be taken as medical advice. Before you start using anything or changing anything or getting your hands on a GLP-1 agonist, whatever it is, make sure that you talk to your physician first and make sure this is right for you, and make sure that you get appropriate guidance, because these are strong compounds. You need to know what you're doing. There's certain things you need to watch out for to avoid certain pitfalls. If you're looking to get in touch with me, you know how to find me. Niddam.com is my website. And you can find me on Facebook in the Optimizing Superhuman Performance group. And you can find me on Instagram at Natalie Niddam. And if you get value from this episode, you know what to do. Please leave us a review, because those reviews is how we get seen. And by all means, share this episode out with family, friends, and frankly, anybody who you think would get good value from it. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you guys, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the podcast, Caleb Greer. It's been a long time coming, this one. How are you today?
I'm good. I was starting to think you didn't want me back.
I'm so going to have you back. I think it's actually probably been a little bit over a year since the last time we recorded, right? Well, there was the time we recorded where we didn't use the episode because we got too deep in the weeds, right? But the one we did on hormones last year was really good. And today, the topic is very topical. The podcast, this episode will air at the beginning of January, which is right about when everybody looks down at themselves and goes, holy jumping, what just happened? Who is this?
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everybody. And especially you layer in a little bit of stress and dysfunction from what's going on in the world, and you get this beautiful amplification effect. So today we're talking about a new drug, really, that has hit the market. I mean, you know better than me how long it's been out in the market. I would say it's bubbled up into my sphere over the last several months. But as you had said when we were talking earlier, these types of medications have been around for about 10 years now. But this one, we're talking about it because it falls under the broad umbrella of peptides. And we are talking, of course, of the GLP-1 agonist class. So you want to help frame this for people a little bit and talk a little bit about yourself, how when you started using this stuff, these products in your practice and stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started a few years ago. Obviously, the weight loss issue kind of came up as a part of practice, right? So with precision medicine and what we do, in the clinic, obviously, musculoskeletal health, pain, all these different things that we were trying to tackle, came head to head with, well, we have to make sure that the frame and the foundation is set appropriately. So how do we get these people to lose weight? And we started doing fasting and Prolon and, all these different things with nutrition and so forth. And, a lot of people started to lose weight, but a lot of people didn't. And we'd have people that would fast for, a week every month and, lose maybe 5 pounds, and some people gained weight. So we really had to take a different look at what was going on and challenge my biases around caloric intake and output and all these different thought processes around how diet is involved and how metabolism is involved and basically how to manipulate it the best way. And so this kind of led to the development of my neuroendocrine control and metabolism approach. And, it looks at central energy homeostasis and peripheral energy homeostasis and really takes into account each person as an individual and, how to really tackle this from the brain down and from the peripheral organs up and how to meet halfway. And part of that was, researching into, okay, what can we use to address this central control mechanism? And I started looking into the GLP-1 agonist class. At that time, the available ones were, exenatide and Trulicity, or not Trulicity. Well, it is Trulicity, but dulaglutide. Let's try to stick to generic names. And liraglutide. And so liraglutide was relatively available. So I started, I reached out to Novo and got started with some sample kits. And I started using them to try and see, well, I had about 30 pounds to lose at the time. And so, I started taking it. It was around COVID starting. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. I didn't have access to a gym. I was just going to do a nice little metabolic reset. And this kind of evolved into a program that was, revolved around a GLP-1 liraglutide at higher doses, which becomes an altogether different brand name drug. So that's interesting too. So beyond that point though, it was really substantial in how it affected my outlook on food, how it changed cravings, and of course how it, just kind of seemed to melt fat away. And yeah, so I don't know if I got too off track there, but really bad.
No, not really. But I do think we need to go back and clarify a couple of things for people, because you talk a lot about the central control, the peripheral control, the neuro control. And so maybe explain to people a little bit what you're talking about here, about where, and I think what bears highlighting is your realization, like so many people, that it's just not about calories in and calories out for so many people. And I think that, one of the things I've been learning over the last little while is that, especially in people who their whole lives have been bouncing around. So they've been losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight. And it's almost like this overuse of these crash diets. They get to their 40s, they're even sometimes their 30s, their 50s, certainly, and beyond. And their body has become so resistant to releasing fat for all of these different reasons that we talk about. And so at that point, having someone just eat less or even eat less and move more, it's just not enough anymore. It just doesn't hit the marks for them. And it takes a much more nuanced approach to start to get the brain, which I think is one of the things you were talking about, get the brain to properly respond to the signals from the gut and the whatever it is, everything that's happening in the body, and vice versa. So maybe you just want to talk a little bit about, because we were talking about this earlier, about leptin and CCK, like there's all these different compounds that are being released in the body that in theory are supposed to travel back up to the brain, send a bunch of signals that allow the body to then do what it's supposed to do. And these signals just get crossed, or they stop working.
Yeah. So, for central control, right, you've got a few main components. You've got the hypothalamus, which is basically this gigantic control center for energy expenditure, appetite regulation, and body homeostasis to a large degree. That talks with the brainstem, which kind of is the hub for integrating signals from the gut and everywhere else, and kind of talking to the different areas to then, ultimately provide output to the organs to say, hey, here's a demand on our resources for the time being, right? And here's what we can do with that. Do we need to promote feeding? Do we need to promote energy expenditure to go out and look for new resources? And basically, how much can we afford to burn through in order to meet current demands? So, in a perfect world, you have all of these gut peptides that are talking between ghrelin, which is going to initiate meals when your energy stores are getting low, and that's going to promote the hypothalamus to then say, well, we need to start mobilizing resources, promote movement to go out and get food, right? And that's when hunger starts. So then hunger starts to grip the individual, and then the person's going to be motivated to go find food. After that happens, they get their food, they eat, the stomach gets expanded, all of these different peptides start to be released to say, hey, we got our meal, insulin's released, leptin is released, GLP-1, CCK, GIP, all these different peptides then go and say, all right, we ate, stop eating, initiate meal termination. And that goes back up to the brain to say, cool, we have what we need, here's our energy storage, and then we're going to set our metabolism according to that. So that's basically, the control of initiation and termination of food. Now, what happens when you have unlimited access to food in your environment?
Which is our world. Yeah.
Exactly. There's no mechanism that the brain has to basically say, don't eat if there's excessive food in the environment, because from all intents and purposes, and evolutionarily, that is a signal that, hey, we've got times of plenty. Let's store it for a rainy day. The problem is we don't have rainy days anymore.
Yeah.
We don't have famines anymore. There's no reason now to maintain the same patterns that we've developed to promote survival. So that's when we initiate, different fasting regimes. But before that, you still have to address the metabolism point of view, because if you fast, your metabolism is going to tank. And, there's debate on whether this happens or not, but I've seen it time and time again where people don't lose weight, they gain weight when they fast. And then you compound, knee pain, joint pain, they can't move more because they hurt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they haven't exercised in 30 years. And, when you're carrying around an extra 30, 40, 50 pounds and inflamed, it's not the time necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just not going to be able to move that much. And we need to give them, it's almost like you need to give those people a leg up so that they can start to move again.
100%. And then, they start seeing weight come off for the first time in 10 years. They're like, oh, I can actually do this. And they get motivated and they get their positive reward. And it's just it's a snowball at that point. They get motivated to be a smaller person again.
Yeah. But I think what you said earlier is also really important to hear. And that is that in some people, fasting does not work. Like those signals to and from the brain, they get crossed up or they don't work properly. And it's like you get these cross wires that no longer allow the body to burn through its stores when the person's fasting. So,
to that point too, like there's legitimate mechanistic data to show that when you fast, ghrelin goes up, the agouti, all the orexigenic peptides in the brain, which mean they promote feeding, go up, right? And those actually inhibit the anorectic or the non-feeding promoting peptides, right? So fasting 100% is going to make you hungry, right? Just because
makes me hungry. To me, it's a big fat mystery. All these people who say, oh yeah, when I'm on day 3 of my fast, I stop being hungry. I'm like, I don't know who you are, because by the time I get to day 5, I could chew my own arm off.
Well, and to that point too, like when people get to that stage and they start to tap into their fat stores, they have the peripheral energy resources to show that, I actually have enough. I don't need to be hungry. Right. So once you get through that initial surge of ghrelin and AGRP and neuropeptide Y, all those signals start to reduce because lo and behold, you start releasing more leptin, the sensitivity to leptin goes up, and then you can actually recognize, oh, actually, we're good. Crisis averted. We've got energy stores available to make it through this famine. That's actually one of the points that we have to make, when people transition from that point. That's what people need a lot of help with, right? Increasing metabolism to increase fat output from the adipose tissue, to increase leptin and increase the sensitivity to leptin, so that they can convert from low basal metabolic rate, high hunger, or low hunger, just depending on who they are, and then move into using their own resources and understanding that they don't have to eat because they have enough food to last them for months.
Right. Right. Okay. But then, so the people who stay hungry, is that because the brain hasn't made that transition? It's not recognized. Either you're not breaking down your energy stores and releasing that energy into the body to be available, or you're just like, the brain's not reading it.
Yeah. So the process, some people, it just takes a long time to tap into ketosis or to use ketones for energy. And so, like when people start these programs, a lot of times I have to tell them, like, look, you're going to crave carbohydrates. Don't refrain from eating carbohydrates, right? So even if it's a spoonful of honey, especially when people start working out, they realize quite quickly that this kind of robs you of your juice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your strength kind of depletes. I mean, you're just in energy crisis. And until you kind of convert and switch over, just like keto flu, just like these different phenomena that people experience when they're doing these different kinds of diets and nutritional restrictions, you got to give your body time. And some people are more carbohydrate dependent than others. Some are going to take a long time to upregulate those transporters and so forth. So, supporting with exogenous ketones, ketone esters, honey, all these different things to avert these energy crises are important tactics to use when manipulating the systems.
Okay. All right. Well, now let's get back to our topic at hand, because what we're really here to talk about today are these GLP-1 agonists that are, they're really taking the world by storm, or at least this little segment of the world that's actually aware of them, which is a growing set. I think it's growing fast, partially because you now have a fairly large pharmaceutical company that's manufacturing 2 of these compounds, and they're going to be pushing it out there. But secondly, because it actually works. And not only does it seem to help people to release fat, but it's got a lot of other side benefits at the same time. So, which is amazing, because so often, you'll find something that helps you to lose weight, but it's going to make you crazy, or it's going to wreck your liver, or it's got some other side effect that you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. But in this instance, it certainly seems that the overwhelming evidence is for benefit in a variety of ways. And so first of all, I guess let's talk about GLP-1, which, as you said, is a naturally occurring peptide in our gut. The problem with GLP-1, it's a bit like the Cheshire cat, right? It's here 1 minute and gone the next. So it doesn't stick around very long to do much. And I guess this is where this pharmaceutical company has done the work to figure out how to hack that mechanism, with the help of the Gila monster.
Gila monster, geez.
Yeah.
So we'll just stick with semaglutide for now.
Let's not get into the intricacies of the liraglutides and the exenatides and whatever else. We'll just stick to one for today.
Yeah. So, it's based on the GLP-1 glucagon-like peptide. There are 2 incretin hormones that basically, in response to caloric intake, specifically carbohydrates and protein, they get released to increase insulin output from the pancreas. That's what an incretin is.
Right.
So when, they discovered all these things, they're like, okay, great. Pharmaceutical companies are like, we got to figure out how to mimic this to address diabetes and different energy metabolism disorders. So they had these initial medications that would have to be injected twice a day. They worked well, but they had high efficacy, but they were not efficacious because people couldn't use them to the same extent. It's like using, kisspeptin or these different gonadotropin releasing hormones that you have to do every 2 or 3 hours to get an appropriate response.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not going to happen.
No. Or you need
So-
one of those insulin pumps that Jean-Francois uses that he talks about.
Yeah. So, they really tried hard to develop a formulation that was resistant to degradation by DPP-4. And, initially the class of diabetic medications that really targeted this were the DPP-4 inhibitors. So they inhibit the enzyme that breaks down GLP-1.
Right.
And so by doing that, they prolonged the half-life and had some benefit there. But there were side effects that were significant with that class. So they really went back and looked at how to make GLP-1 last for a longer time. So through various different modifications, liraglutide came out, still short half-life, had to do it every day. And then, eventually Novo came out with semaglutide, which is Ozempic, that is very close to GLP-1 in homology. It's about 94% the same as what we naturally produce. But it's got small modifications that are small peptide modifications that allow it to resist degradation, have a half-life of 3 or 4 days, and so you can do it every week. And steady after about 3 or 4 weeks. So that was a great development in the field, and one of the surprising benefits was that people were dropping weight like crazy, and so. Obviously the A1C lowering effect for diabetics and, all these different changes in fasting blood sugar and insulin levels was fantastic for that disease state. But the fact that they lost so much weight without even trying, right, was extraordinary. So of course they did more trials and kind of figured out that, yeah, you can use it for weight loss. And even beforehand, liraglutide was used as a weight loss medication at higher doses, right? Saxenda is what the brand name for that was. So that was just hijacking the diabetic medication and using it for weight loss, which is the same thing that's happened with semaglutide being both Ozempic and Wegovy, right? Same drug, just different dose.
So what's Wegovy? Is it just lower dose or higher dose?
Wegovy is higher dose. It's 2.4 milligrams. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is 2.4.
Okay. So yeah, that's what they used in the studies. Yeah. Sorry. They worked people up to that 2.4 milligram dose.
So that's an important point too, right? You have to work your way up to the actual effective doses, because part of the mechanism of action of these peptides is to increase certain neuropeptides that elicit food aversion responses, right? So this would be CCK and CGRP. People will feel nauseous because those are the same compounds that are released when you get food poisoning, for example, right? So anything that increases these compounds, even migraine, right? That's why the anti-CGRPs are available, right? So anything that has a general alarm signal raises the peptides. They go to the brain and say, hey, there's something wrong here. The signal came from the gut. We need to get it out, right? So will start to occur. You've also got the gastric emptying that slows down, and sometimes that can be a trigger for nausea. So there's a lot of different reasons to take this slow, gradually reintroduce higher levels of GLP-1 to your system. And, for some people, they have no side effects whatsoever, right? They'll jump from 5 to 0.5 to 1 to whatever they need to go to, and it's not a big deal. Other people I've had throw up for days, right? So it's not something
really.
that you can take. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so it's not for everybody. And for whatever reason, some people tolerate it really well. Some people don't tolerate it at all.
Yeah. But I mean, that's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit. So one of the things I recommend to people, who've been put on a GLP-1 agonist like Ozempic, as you say, the main way to get it, the principal way to get it is by prescription. And it is, one of the downsides of Ozempic is that it's an expensive drug. Do you see that changing anytime soon, or is that just Novo making their money back on their investment, which has been significant? Like, it's been years in the making, this thing, right? It's taken them a long time to get here.
I mean, that, and, they're paving the way for less expensive alternatives, right? So they did the work. They figured out a lot of this stuff, and they deserve to, name their price. Now, as far as being affordable, like for type 2 diabetics, it's
covered,
really free, So there's demographics that it's used for that as a provider, we can get it covered. right? So for people that are doing it for fitness and that kind of thing, it's a different story. And there
Mhm.
are alternative avenues that we can get the drug for them at relatively inexpensive or free, right? Patient assistance programs and so forth. So, having someone that's been around to navigate these things can get you a solution rather easily. Now, as far as getting it cheaply, I don't think it's going to be cheap anytime soon. Now,
No.
I've seen both compounding pharmacies and research facilities making the drug, and to that, I wonder how long it's going to last, / if they're even the right peptide, because it's not like these are easy things to make, right?
Mhm.
People that have synthesizing, ability can definitely figure out how to do it. It's not rocket science. The patent's out there, but at the same time, it's not affordable to have that kind of machinery. And even on that point of view, it's like, why risk it if you can't go and actually test it out and see what it's like? Just
What
moot
it
point.
actually
But
is.
regardless,
Yeah.
yeah, there are patents on these things, and eventually Novo is going to come down on it, and I don't think that's something to kind of play with.
No. Well, and I think the bigger point to your point is, even because patents, my understanding that patents have a lot of information in them, but they're always allowed to hold back a small amount of information that is proprietary. And is it not possible that in that proprietary chunk of information is, I mean, it would make sense to me that that would hold like the trade secret or whatever it is that makes the semaglutide that Novo is making different or work in a certain way or whatever the case may be? Or do you think that's not likely?
No, I mean, because the peptide sequence is out there and the modifications are out there. So if you've got the background to know how to make these certain modifications on peptides and kind of add sequences, then it's not that big of a deal if you have the equipment and the know-how.
Okay.
It's kind of like why like Coca-Cola trademarked instead of patented their thing, right? So if anybody figures out the Coca-Cola recipe, they have it, they can use it.
Mm-hmm. They
Because
just can't market it and call it that. Okay. Well, let's not stay on this too long. There's lots more other stuff, more interesting stuff to talk about when it comes to semaglutide. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, do you think that because of this slower gastric emptying and because people so often are challenged in their production of digestive enzymes, do you feel that it's beneficial for people to use digestive enzymes when they're using GLP-1 agonists?
yes and no. So on a trial basis, I give people digestive enzymes, if they have issues, but you have to be careful, especially if they've had, PPI use. Antacid use.
Yeah.
In their history, or if they've had any kind of issues with, esophageal, like any kind of reflux.
Yeah.
Enzymes can always make it worse, right? So if they've had a gastric environment that's been low acid, and you give them digestive enzymes, especially if it has HCl or betaine or anything that increases stomach acid, their reflux might be worse, right? On the same token, if you give them enzymes when they're eating food that's going to stay there for a long time, it might be better to at least have that digested and cause reflux than to be undigested and cause reflux. So, there's a lot of different avenues to go down. When I give someone digestive enzymes, I say, all right, look, you could have no problem, digestion could be better, etc.
Right.
It could be reflux, right? So if you take them and 30 minutes later to an hour later, you feel like you have stomach acid in your throat, then, either cut back the dose or figure out what you ate with that meal and see if we can manipulate that next time. So it's not just a carte blanche recommendation to do the digestive enzymes,
For
even though
sure.
for the most part, it works well.
Yeah. So, for me, I find that I always get better results if I take them kind of after I've started my meal a little bit, not before the end of the meal. Like, your stomach is going to churn stuff up. So it's not like everything you eat is going to sit there like a parfait in a perfect layer kind of thing. Like it's going to get smushed together. But I do find slightly better results and less chance of that kind of reflux or that hyperacidity if they take the enzymes during the meal or, closer to the beginning of the meal, during the meal. And it just seems to help. But to your point, it's definitely not a blanket solution. But I do think that in a lot of cases, and also because just people don't make enough digestive enzymes in general, it can be helpful. So let's go back to GLP-1 and let's talk about all the different benefits that we're seeing or that have been highlighted in the studies, because I think it's almost like when you read the paper sometimes, or you listen to people talking about it, it almost takes them by surprise a little bit. Yeah. I mean, because, everybody was trying to lose weight and improve blood sugar response, like insulin secretion and HbA1c and all that stuff. But then there's all this other cool stuff that seems to happen downstream. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's a big piece of why people are so excited about it.
Yeah. So, beyond the metabolic benefit of delaying glucose spikes in the bloodstream and all that, I think it's really important to recognize that we're increasing insulin in response to the food, right? So that's almost inverse to what everyone says about food-related weight gain, weight loss, etc., right? Everyone wants to almost eliminate insulin right now in the world because of its fat promoting, qualities. Well, bodybuilders have known this for a very long time, but, insulin is nearly the most anabolic hormone that we have for both muscle and for fat. So it's really interesting because when you have someone who is insulin tolerant and glucose tolerant, insulin is going to be a great meal terminating sign, right? Insulin goes up. That means you ate. That means we need to shut down hunger, shut down food intake, just like GLP-1 does. So that signal kind of gets restored. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon that I see when people first start. Their fasting insulin actually goes up quite a bit, and eventually it comes down. But that's something that we kind of have to wrestle with right now in the field, because if people are losing weight despite hyperinsulinemia and all of the factors that we typically associate with hyperinsulinemia are reversing, like triglyceride numbers and LDL values and all these different things that we're trying to correlate with metabolic health, well, all that's improving at the same time this one marker of high insulin is going down. I think it's going to kind of turn the field a little bit, not upside down, but kind of question the validity of low carb.
Like chronic low carb. Yeah.
But besides that, the effect of GLP-1 in the brain and on the brainstem and the hypothalamus, to go back to those two centers, is spectacular in the sense that the sympathetic nervous system output to fat tissue gets switched on by the agonism of GLP-1 in the brain.
Okay, say that in English. The sympathetic output. What does that mean?
So you've got your two branches of the sympathetic nervous system, right? Of the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah.
One sympathetic, the other parasympathetic. All lipolytic action, right? So fat burning action.
Yes.
Occurs from the catecholamines, right? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, that get released from sympathetic nerve terminals.
Perfect. Thank you.
When those neuron bodies get activated in the brain, they go down to the spinal cord and they enter into the adipose tissue and the muscle tissue, and they instigate fat burning, right, for fatty acid release to feed other tissues.
Perfect.
And so that whole process gets cranked on by the GLP-1 class as a whole, especially since it's going systemic, right? It's not depending on GLP-1 release from the gut or from the intestines, traveling up the vagus and doing that whole long route. And also the concentration is also a big deal too, because the small amount that you get from eating a meal is not sufficient to generate weight loss in any significant degree. So you inject this stuff peripherally, it goes systemic, and it super saturates all of those areas, and it cranks out sympathetic activity. This is why heart rate increases. This is
I was going to say
kind of gets a little bit interrupted. HRV tanks, right? There's a lot of different things that you have to recognize with increased sympathetic output, burning fat, and kind of having a higher basal metabolic rate, especially while you sleep. It's important for how this thing works, right? If people take it and they're not under, supervision, they're like, why is my heart rate so high? Why am I sweating at night? Why are all these things happening? And it can be anxiety provoking, right? So having people know that that's an important mechanism of how this works, it's a big deal.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. I mean, I will definitely, I've been using a low dose of Ozempic now for, I want to say 6 weeks, maybe something like that. And I've given up. I mean, and actually paradoxically, by the time I get to the week and at the end of the week, and this speaks to the 3 to 4 day half-life, I will start to see my metrics on my biostrap and my aura start to recover a little bit. Like my HRV starts to recover a bit, but my heart rate, which consistently was in the 40s overnight, is now consistently in the low 50s. So either aura and biostrap are kind of giving up, saying, okay, fine.
Yeah. I mean, I can go back and on my aura and look exactly when I started liraglutide when I first started, and my heart rate went, from being in the 50s, like yours, and now very seldomly does it ever go under 70.
Really?
Yeah, it's a resting heart rate. I mean, sometimes I'll get to 66, 67, but and my heart rate variability went from 70s to low 20s, teens.
Wow.
And very seldomly do I get a spike above that.
So let me ask you this. Is there anything to worry about if your heart rate is consistently that much higher all the time? Like, is that any cause for concern for people? Could that, in 20 or 30 years come back and bite a person? Or does anybody know the answer to that question? Do you think?
I don't think anybody knows the answer. I mean, we can hypothesize that the more heartbeats you have, the more likelihood that you're going to have, not an earlier death, but, a shorter lifespan. But, that being said too, being super fit and having a low metabolic rate because you're just so efficient is not the best thing if you want to lose weight or maintain, a low body fat percentage. So I think it has to be taken into context of what your goals are and what you want to do. And also measuring surrogates for overall health, right? So
right.
I have people go get echocardiograms to see what their heart output is, or see if they have ventricular hypertrophy or anything we're kind of looking at from the perspective of, am I doing a disservice by doing this right now? And so we're gathering data for that. And I'm making sure that everything is, going in the right direction, but also if you're reversing diabetes and dropping, 5 or 6 pounds of visceral fat and reducing hip and waist ratios and all this different stuff, it's like, okay, if I shorten your life by 5 years by increasing your heart rate by 10 or 15 beats, but you live 20 more years with a different quality of life that was going to be so much better than you were going to have anyway. I don't know. It seems like a good trade-off, if that's even a trade-off.
If it's a trade-off, exactly. Because I think you could argue that the lower load on your system by not carrying around the extra weight and having fat around the visceral organs and, goo in your bloodstream and like, a fatty liver, the whole 9 yards, you could see that
vascular resistance, all these different things that are going to reduce as a function of being healthier, that, even if your heart's having to work harder all day long with its beats, at least it's getting a return flow that's sufficient for oxygenation and so forth.
Right. Okay. I wanted to ask you another question. So so we know that GLP-1 increases insulin output, it's a good thing, right? Insulin, it's putting shit away that needs to be put away. You're not eating as much food. You're not, like, all the things are lining up. But what about people who are very insulin resistant? Doesn't it also improve insulin sensitivity, GLP-1?
Yeah. So when GLP-1 binds its receptors, it helps, number one, upregulate GLUT4 transporters. So those are the transporters that allow for glucose to enter cells and then, be metabolized into energy. So increasing GLUT4 translocation is one mechanism by which this body is not working as hard to stuff glucose into its cells.
Okay.
I think initially where a lot of the benefit comes from is the reduction in caloric intake. From that regard, if you just stop eating, your insulin sensitivity will improve. Right. So it's not going to necessarily translate to weight loss yet.
Right.
At least from a metabolic perspective, your insulin sensitivity will improve. Your glucose disposal will improve. Especially if you focus on muscle mass too, which is another end of the program spectrum. But in and of itself, I think the reason that we don't see a worsening of insulin resistance when you increase insulin postprandially is that overall the meal sizes are reduced. Typically, they don't want to eat the same kind of junk that they typically do. And so I think there's a lot of lifestyle slash, just habitual changes that occur to lessen the load of that insulin on the body.
Right. And I do feel that, giving people some coaching around nutrition at this time is a really good idea, because, you take someone with horrible eating habits. Well, if they just eat one Big Mac instead of 5 Big Macs, I mean, overall, they'll be better off.
Right.
It's still not quite optimal. So you're still getting a little hurt here somewhere. So what about in terms of, okay, so no, before I go to that, I'll write a note and I'll go to it later. So let's stay with the GLP-1 agonist benefits. So we talked about improved insulin secretion, improved transport of glucose into cells, which is automatic. I mean, I would think in a way also it's going to help people who do work out, because you're getting more energy into those cells. And it's not specific to any particular cell, right? It's not going to be like only one type of cell. Like skeletal muscle is going to take in glucose more efficiently as well as anything else.
Well, so there are different signal transduction pathways that are tissue dependent.
Okay.
But that's getting way too far in the weeds. In
Okay.
general,
Let's pull back.
It doesn't promote glucose storage in an adipose tissue, for example. Right?
No,
so it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. We don't want that.
Right. So, I mean, it depends.
Well, not right now. We don't.
As far as improving, energetic capacity of muscle tissue with athletes, it's a mixed review, right? Because a lot of people, when they're starting, they get depleted very quickly, right? Their glycogen stores are going low because glucagon's inhibited. All these different mechanisms have to do with basically glycolytic activity is going to suffer, right? So there's a period of time in transitioning, especially when people have metabolic inefficiencies, even if they're healthy, that they're going to see a decrease in performance.
But I don't think well, I don't know. I feel like for me, interestingly, it's interesting you bring this up, because thinking back, there was a couple of weeks there where I wear a heart rate monitor when I work out, because I do these HIIT workouts, and heart rate monitor wearing is part of it. I couldn't even get my heart rate up for a while. Like, I mean, I had some of the worst workouts I've ever logged. And yet in the last couple of weeks, I've logged some of the most amazing workouts I've ever logged. And I wonder if part of it is conditioning. I've just been more consistent and I've just been going to the gym more. But part of it, I wonder if part of it might be in part this adaptation that's kind of happened over time. That's just allowed things to take off in a different way, because I'm definitely seeing very different numbers than I was seeing even before all this started.
Yeah. And again, it is, sometimes it takes people months, but sometimes it is a couple of weeks, right? It's just a transition of energy, the utilization of different energy for different kinds of exercise. And so some people it takes a while, some people do it very quickly. But by and large, there is a decrease in performance for some period of time after starting this stuff.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. All right. So then let's talk about, there's another area that's getting a lot of really cool attention on the GLP-1 agonist, and particularly I think semaglutide, and that is the brain, which I think it's really interesting, right? So to someone, I mean, obviously when and particularly around Alzheimer's.
Yeah. And
there's some studies going on, clinical trials happening now with Alzheimer's patients, I believe, and semaglutide. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because there's a couple of, there's a couple of red herrings, and then, could it just be an improvement in how they're utilizing glucose in the brain and energy to the brain cells? But I think most likely it's going to go a little deeper than that.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the literature we have available in the animal models, using GLP-1 in normal metabolically functioning animals, right? And it improves learning and memory. And mechanistically, we've got to think about, or at least teleologically speaking, like the point of that would be to nail down where food is in the environment, right? To kind of remember that, hey, I ate something, I got this peptide released, and then it's going to do some different mechanisms to make sure that I remember and condition to where different places are. So you can cue it a little bit, right? So it improves learning and memory on that sense. And part of the reason that they showed, or part of why that happened, was because they showed that there was actual neurogenesis. They made more neural stem cells in the part of the brain that's responsible for spatial memory, right? The hippocampus. So since that's one of the regions that gets atrophied with, dementia and Alzheimer's in particular, they then went and kind of looked at, okay, well, in models of Alzheimer's, what does administration of GLP-1 do?
Right.
So they showed that same increase in neuroprogenitors, and they also showed, for whatever it might mean, a reduction in amyloid beta in the brain. Whether that's a red herring or not, we're not going to get into.
No.
The other aspect of what it did too was, increase the neurotrophic factors, which can be good or bad depending on where it happens. But also the glucose metabolism in those mouse models of Alzheimer's was relatively reversed. So not only did the mitochondria function better because glucose could be utilized, because insulin was working better, all these different things we consider with, type 3 diabetes and Alzheimer's, a lot of those, got better. And so I think there's definitely drug development right now that's utilizing the incretins plus a couple of different, peptides to test out in these models. I'm not sure if any of them are human yet.
Oh, okay. I didn't get that. Okay, cool. So I wasn't sure if there was anything in humans just yet. All right. So, but early indications would say there's no downside for the brain right now that we know of. If anything, there might be a bit of an upside.
Yeah, definitely no downside. I mean, again, there's definitely issues with not eating enough, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And also by not eating enough, having different dynamics of electrolyte balance, with eating sodium and holding on to fluids, and people's proclivity to drink way too much freaking water and dilute themselves. So there's been a huge.
You don't hear that too often, actually. That's interesting. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
It's so prevalent. There's so many people that drink way too much water and they're not replacing electrolytes to a significant degree, and they're getting brain fog and concentration issues and cramping and bloating, and they're like, I don't know what's happening, I'm drinking tons of water. I'm like, well, stop. Right?
Well, what about putting electrolytes in your water? Would that help?
Yeah, well, that's what I tell them to do. So I say basically a teaspoon or a gram of sodium per 16 ounces of fluid, and that's basically enough to get them going. And even if it's too much sodium, they just pee it out.
Yeah.
Right. The literature on how much sodium you should do that came from the cardiovascular prevention stuff is actually 4 to 5 grams a day. So it's a significant amount more than people typically consume, especially if you're doing sauna and red light, different modalities that make you sweat more. And then people aren't replacing their electrolytes, and they seem to forget that everything is based on the action potential, right? And the distribution between sodium and chloride and potassium, right? If you don't have those in balance, everything kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing how fast, you just give somebody some salt and like, hey, I feel good. And a lot of the side effects of Ozempic and not eating enough and doing these different things can be mitigated by just increasing salt intake.
But that's a paradox, right? Because a lot of the people who are using Ozempic, and in this, I'm thinking even of my mom who has high blood pressure, who's been told to cut salt out, who's now using one of these. She's not using semaglutide, she's using liraglutide. And she's been told cut salt.
You said she's on Trulicity, right?
Yeah.
It's dulaglutide.
Or dulaglutide. I get them all mixed up. All right. I'm not prescribed, but just to be clear, guys, I'm not prescribing any of these things. So I get to mix them up. Caleb, on the other hand, prescribes them. He never mixes them up.
Yeah. So, I mean, hypertension is an interesting model too, right? So that same study kind of looked at a distribution of people that had too low of a sodium, and that actually instigates
high blood pressure.
Alarm.
Yeah.
It's an alarm to the body that, hey, we need to hold on to our sodium, aldosterone goes up, the whole renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system gets activated, sympathetic output increases, not in a good way. So that just increases vasoconstriction.
Yeah.
So it's a catch-22 where now I think people are really starting to realize that the whole low sodium thing for hypertension, some people it's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most people it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's about working with your doctor and figuring that out to see where you fall into those two camps.
Yeah, and it's really simple. I mean, a urinalysis is going to show you what your specific gravity is. You contrast that with serum osmolarity or just looking at your metabolic panel that has your sodium and potassium.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so where were we? We were talking about, one of the other things also I wanted to highlight is again, as people's appetite decreases, paying special attention to nutrient density is really, really key. Because again, and I mean, my poor mom, she's going to be the star of the show here. She started losing her hair after a few months.
Yeah.
And I know that she's not eating protein. Like because her appetite's tanked, she's like, oh, I don't want to eat that, or she'll eat vegetables or fruit or whatever it is. And she's become deficient in protein. And now the hair's jumping off her head, literally, like she's become so protein deficient. So I just think it's one of those things that people, again, if they're going to be using these products, quite often, I mean, you're the kind of physician that will tell people, you'll kind of give people the heads up, but so many people just get handed a prescription and sent on their way. And I think it's just really important to watch at this point what you're eating.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I just want to clarify, I'm a nurse practitioner, not a physician. So
right. Sorry.
Yeah. No good. No
okay.
Good.
It'll be in the show notes.
But yeah, no, nutrient density is super important. And so is the acknowledgement that when you're doing this without hormonal support, that you're going to lose muscle mass too. Right. And so
yes.
the whole avenue of making sure, now I always tell people to prioritize protein. If they're going to eat a lot less, then they need to use something like amino acids, like the MAP amino acids or collagen, something that you can mix in fluid that you're going to consume anyway without feeling like you're eating anything. Because you're right. I mean, the aversion to most foods, especially dense ones, is pretty high. So definitely improving some aspect of protein intake, whether it's beef jerky or liver chips or something like that. And then also making sure that there's enough bioactive compounds, like through eating some beef organs or doing the supplements like that, right? It's a great way to induce that. The other thing that you have to take into account with hair loss, though, is the actual fat loss that you're getting in the subcutaneous space in the scalp, right? So that's an important metric to think about when you're losing all this weight super fast. If it's coming from your scalp, then you're going to lose blood flow and you're going to lose a lot of supply to that hair. I mean, I think you've talked about this before with someone on the podcast.
Yeah, I think it was it would have been Ian Mitchell and Tammy Morelia with their hair systems product.
Yeah, so that's important to remember too. So maybe hanging upside down, getting some blood flow to your head.
Or red light actually is a good one also, because it just brings energy to the mitochondria and helps to stimulate. But hanging upside down, I'm not feeling it for my mom. She's not going to do that.
Handstand. All right. So
okay.
Next point.
So next one is the dark side, right? So there is a possibility of a couple of things. One thing in particular going sideways that I've seen it in my group on Facebook. You've seen it with a couple of your patients, and that is the possibility of developing pancreatitis.
Yes.
So why don't we talk about that a little bit? It's not the vast majority of people. The main thing that people complain about is nausea. And in some people it abates, and in other people it doesn't allow them to continue. So just so you know, in the time we have left, I want to talk a little bit about pancreatitis. And then the last thing I want to talk about quickly is, do people have to be on these things forever, or is there a finish line?
Got it. Okay. So yeah, pancreatitis, I mean, it's a real pain. I mean, because
pain being the understatement of the universe. Yes.
It sneaks up on you. I mean, because you can be totally fine one day and then wake up the next day and just have a hot knife going through the midsection. So it's hard to tell that it's happening before it actually happens. So, I mean, one of the things that I recommend people to do while they're on this is take oral BPC. I mean, that's just kind of like a mitigation strategy that I like to have.
Yeah.
Especially after people started to get a little bit of that stomach issue. So I was like, all right, I'm not even going to deal with this. If you can afford it, take it. If you can't, then we're looking out for it.
Yeah.
Again, glutamine, going back to the amino acids situation, is something I recommend too. But, you know, back to the pathophysiology that's happening here, no one really knows why it happens. You know, part of it could be, you know, the delayed emptying leads to a delay of the food getting into the, you know, that first part of the intestine, the duodenum.
Yeah.
But before that, you're still releasing pancreatic enzymes. And if there's no chyme in there to digest, you know, it could just go back into the pancreas and start to
like almost like a backup. Yeah.
It could be something to do with, you know, excessive production of enzymes coming down from the vagus in response to the GLP-1. I mean, there's a number of different hypotheses out there, but, you know, the important thing is that it can happen. It's super rare. I mean, again, in a few hundred people, a couple. Yeah.
But it's still a thing. It can happen. So I just think people need to be aware of that. There's also there's a caveat in the literature that you will see in the flyer for Ozempic that speaks to, in some of the animal studies they observed in rats, there seemed to be an increase in tumors on the thyroid. Was that?
Yeah. So medullary thyroid cancer is a contraindication for the medication.
So if people have had thyroid cancer, they're basically you wouldn't use
specific medullary thyroid cancer. So
medullary thyroid cancer. Okay.
Specific kind of cancer. And again, that's also pretty rare.
Okay.
Even going back to the literature, this is only found in rats. It hasn't been reproduced in people.
Okay.
It has been seen in the amount of studies they've done to date. Now, whether it's going to happen eventually down the road, maybe. I think it's smart for Novo to put it as a black box warning, even though it kind of makes people kind of freak out a little bit, because if it does end up happening, then at least they said, hey, it's been on the warning label.
Right.
It's unlikely to occur in humans. I think one of the biggest differences between mouse and human thyroids are that they have a lot more GLP-1 receptors on their thyroid gland.
Oh, interesting.
We don't.
Okay. That's really interesting. All right. So then the last question, and then you're just going to tell people how to get in touch with you if they need to, is the last question is, do people need to be taking GLP-1 agonists forever till the end of time, and does anybody actually know that? Yeah.
Well, no one actually knows that, but I mean, if you look back at the studies, once they stop, the weight gain is kind of inevitable, right? So people generally go back to eating. It's tough, right? Because the way that we're doing it, right, is as a lifestyle intervention. We're doing this while they change their habits.
Yeah.
We're using it to manipulate their environment so that they can make those changes without succumbing to, you know, cravings.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think if you're just doing this, then yeah, you'll have to take it forever. Whether it's at the same dose or not, unlikely, right? So I have people that have been taking it for, you know, a year or so, and they met their goal, right? They're at their weight, they're at their optimal physique, and now they just take a little bit, you know, every other week, every third week. Thanksgiving's coming up, they'll take some. So they kind of just use it as a literal biohack for their appetite and their metabolism when they know they're going to be a little bit naughty.
Right. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And to your point, I think that if people use this opportunity to change their lifestyle, their diet, their way of doing things, and plus all these other things have improved, right? Your insulin sensitivity is improved. You're no longer insulin resistant. All these different things have also changed. You're now playing on a different playing field. And if you pull the right levers and do the right things, you have an opportunity to possibly either not need it, or to your point, needing it in very tiny doses on occasion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, even the way that I use it now is more of that. And it's, you know, it's a opportunity cost thing for me, right? I've got 2 kids. I want to enjoy the pizza party. I want to have you know, ice cream and enjoy life a little bit, but also, you know, maintain my vanity and stay under 10% body fat. You know? So it's just like a combination of,
yes, go to Caleb, have your cake and eat it too.
I can do it as least as possible and get the most out of it.
Lovely. I love it. Okay, Caleb. Well, this has been amazing. I know that you've got to run and go see patients. So do you maybe want to share where people can find you, or how you work with patients and all that kind of stuff? Because
Yeah.
People will want to know.
Well, I guess we'll see. The clinic that I work for, is based in Austin, Texas. It's precision, regenerative, and functional medicine. I see people on a membership basis now. That the cost kind of varies, but right now I think we're at $100 a month. We do take insurance for most people if you have it, if we take it. But outside of that, the schedule is really crazy right now with the holiday and so forth. I think our first new patient availability is in February. So if people are interested, they can reach out to my medical assistant. His name is Nate, and the email for him is Nate at austinppc petercharlie.com.
Perfect.
So they can reach out to him if they're interested, they have questions and so forth. And then otherwise, yeah, I'm not really on social media. I have a social media page for my private kind of education consulting company, but I'm never on it, so don't bother.
Don't bother. No, and I have the pleasure of sometimes working with Caleb on my clients who are his patients, and that's always a fun journey, because I find we get to pull different levers on different days, and it's I hope they think it's as fun as we think it's fun, because it totally gets us to bring everything to bear that we both know. But Caleb makes all the difference, and they do have the best outcomes, because when you have medical oversight and stuff, there's nothing quite like it. So Caleb, thank you again for your time today and for your generosity in sharing information with me all the time. It's been a pleasure, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Natalie. We should do a Q&A or something, and get see how people's response, and if there's any more questions, or we didn't clarify things, or I just kind of went too far above, then we can figure that out.
Perfect. Yeah, no. So you heard it here, guys. If you've got lots and lots of questions for Caleb you want us to answer, then we'll do a follow-up, even a mini episode, and maybe put it out the same week as the main. Oh no, it won't be the same week, because you'll only be listening to it that week. Regardless, we'll figure it out. Thank you so much. And yes, opportunities for Qs and As. Have a great day.
Thank you.